this one, someone that don't.
This video is a long time coming. I meant to play this game so many times within the past year after I played the first game and made a video on it in 2021, and I finally got around to it. Apologies to those of you waiting on this. I see you Dishonored fans have been waiting for a long time. Dishonored 2 released in 2016, which was already 6 years ago, believe it or not. About 4 years after the release of the original game, which on its own is a very underrated game. But man, Dishonored 2 does exactly what every good sequel should and improve upon the groundwork the original game set in seemingly every way. I've really been enjoying Arcane's games lately. Deathloop, which came out last year, was really fun as well, though I still far prefer both Dishonored games. They have a really good formula here, and even though I think Dishonored 2 ended on a conclusive and satisfying note, I'd still love to see a Dishonored 3 or even another game similar to it sometime in the future. Its formula is just so much fun, and I actually played this game 3 full times before making this video, and I played the entirety of the Death of the Outsider DLC as well. I enjoyed it so much. Which leads to what I think is Dishonored 2's biggest strength, and that's its replayability. It's so rare for me to replay a game 3 times back to back, especially within the span of a few days, but Dishonored 2 has so many different ways to play, different endings, and even 2 completely different main stories to follow. You can be a pacifist and go with a low chaos playthrough where you use non-lethal means to go through the different missions and take out your targets. That leads to a more positive, optimistic ending. Or if you have a major bloodlust like me, you can go for a high chaos playthrough where you kill your enemies and assassinate targets, which results in a darker ending. On top of that, you have 2 main characters to choose from: Corvo, the royal protector and protagonist of the first game, also father of the Empress Emily Caldwin, who was the little girl you had to save in the first game, or you can play as Emily herself as a grown woman. So that alone is already 4 different possible ways to play the game, where you can do a Corvo low or high chaos playthrough, or an Emily low or high chaos playthrough. That alone leads to 4 different endings, not to mention all the different sub choices you make throughout the game that leads to differences in the endings as well. You can even choose to do a playthrough with none of the supernatural powers and rely solely on your sword and stealth skills. For my first playthrough, when I was learning the ropes, I did a high chaos run as Corvo, where I let out my violent tendencies. Then I did a low chaos run with Emily, where I spared everyone. And yes, it was very hard to hold back sometimes, I will admit. Then I did a final playthrough where I chose Corvo, rejected the Outsider's mark, and played the game with no powers. And just to make it even harder for myself, I turned off the HUD. And yes, the bloodlust came back, so there were no survivors. Believe it or not, I most enjoyed the no powers and no HUD playthrough with Corvo. It felt so immersive and a bit more realistic. I really had to be very cautious, take things slow, observe the area, and really plan out how I was going to navigate a lot of the stealth sections. It was definitely a lot more challenging not being able to use the powers to just teleport around, but I actually preferred the game that way, even though the powers are really cool and can be a lot of fun to use. But even after those 3 playthroughs, I still have so many ways to play the game. I plan to do a low chaos Corvo playthrough as well, but I figured I should probably make a video first. The stealth is really what makes this game's formula work so well though. The combat is not nearly as in-depth or satisfying, which is actually really refreshing because it feels like the opposite in a lot of games today, where they have these advanced and intricate combat systems and then just a bare bones stealth system. You could go for an assault/combat style in Dishonored 2 if you want to. In fact, I'm tempted to try that as well, but stealth is definitely the definitive way to play the game and what got the most love and attention. I also really like how Dishonored 2 allows you to view your stats for your missions, to see how many times you were detected by enemies or how many people you killed. You get a little green check mark under Ghostly whenever you complete an entire mission without getting spotted, and that's so satisfying. The same thing goes for Merciful when you complete a mission without killing a single person. Lame. Like I said, there's plenty of lethal and non-lethal options for whichever way you decide to play the game. For non-lethal, you can choke enemies out, shoot them with sleep darts, or set up stun mines. You can even possess them, rendering them unconscious. You can throw chloroform bottles at them. There's a lot of different options at your disposal if that's how you choose to play. Now, if you're a killer, like the cool kids, you obviously get a lot of options as well, with your classic folding sword, crossbow, spring razor, incendiary bolts, a shotgun, just endless ways to make your enemies suffer. Dude, people are actually gonna start thinking I'm insane. Oh well. And make no mistake, this is not an easy game. The AI can be very perceptive depending on the difficulty and the way you set them up. This game actually allows you to customize and tweak the difficulty of all sorts of things, like detection speed or attack frequency, and how well enemies can see above them. The AI in this game is pretty good, which I feel is uncommon for stealth games at times. Sure, the detection can still be a little wonky sometimes, but definitely not as bad as some other games I've played. Another element I really like with stealth is sabotage. You can loot or purchase rewire tools so you can sabotage different technologies within the mission, like a wall of light so it torches anyone who isn't you. But enemies aren't aware of that, so they stroll in and get disintegrated. It's very rewarding to watch. You can place it on alarms and security systems as well, and even on the clockwork soldiers, aka the bane of my existence. So having them rewired and fighting for you is extremely helpful. Speaking of clockwork soldiers though, Dishonored 2 also has quite the enemy variety. There's of course all your different forms and variants of standard guards, but there's also witches who can teleport around, hound dogs who can sniff you when in close proximity, and yeah, those annoying clockwork soldiers who easily gave me the most trouble in this game, considering they can see through the front and back of their heads and can kill you almost instantly. Then there's all the supernatural powers, which bring a whole other element to stealth. Corvo and Emily actually have different powers while sharing only a few. I love that they really put emphasis in creating a difference between Corvo and Emily in terms of gameplay that fits more with their individual fighting styles and personalities. For example, Corvo has Blink from the first game, which allows him to teleport to anything within a certain range, while Far Reach allows Emily to basically use venom powers and grab onto a surface or enemies and pull them towards her. I definitely preferred Blink because you actually disappear from the enemy's view while teleporting, while they can still see you during Far Reach. Emily also has a really fun one called Shadow Walk, where you basically turn into this really quick shadow that can kill or knock out enemies in stealth. There's stuff like Bend Time that puts everything into slow motion, Possession that allows you to enter the minds of rats or even enemy NPCs and control them. There's Rat Swarm that sends a swarm of rats to devour any nearby enemies or their corpses. There's so many fun and unique powers to mess around with. Now there is a mana bar in Dishonored 2, so you can't just constantly abuse the powers, and it definitely forced me to use my mana sparingly and wait for it to replenish before using another power. The powers and other little upgrades can be purchased with runes, which you find in the game world, along with bone charms that give you little boosts or skills to aid in your endeavors. You can even purchase the ability to sacrifice bone charms and then craft your own. And on top of all this, there's some physical attributes you can upgrade as well, like agility and jump height. You can have bodies vanish after you assassinate them. You can upgrade your strength so you can throw things further, and you can upgrade your weapons, optics, gadgets, and charm slots in the black market shops. You can upgrade pretty much every tool and ability at your disposal, which is really cool. It makes for some very satisfying progression and incentivizes you to explore more and collect all the runes, charms, and gold that you can. And there's one more gadget that I have to dedicate some time to talk about, because it's honestly one of the coolest gadgets I've ever seen implemented in a stealth game, the Timepiece. Now you only get this for one mission, but it's so incredible. Easily my favorite mission of the game. The Timepiece is essentially a handheld time travel machine that allows you to seamlessly travel back in time 3 years and back to the present, all while in this abandoned mansion. So you can travel into the past, kill a guard, travel back to the present, and plan where to attack once again in the past. You can see how the mansion has changed drastically throughout the years, and what exactly happened all those years ago that led it to where it is now. You can even flip the lens on the timepiece to see in real time what the other timeline is looking like. Such a creative and fun stealth mechanic to be able to seamlessly time travel between these two areas. Certain actions you perform in the past will even change and affect what the world looks like in the present. It's just such a fun concept to use time travel as a stealth mechanic. I've heard something similar is in Titanfall 2's campaign, campaign as well, and I think an entire game based on this would be insane. The timepiece is restricted to the one level, like I said, because first of all, the developers had to design the same map in 2 different time periods while keeping all the minuscule details of the area consistent, which is very impressive and would be a huge amount of work to do for an entire game. Deathloop does heavily involve the time travel idea, but it doesn't use the timepiece like in Dishonored 2, which is a little disappointing. Either way, I had to spend some time giving that feature the respect it deserves because that mission has to be one of my favorites in any stealth game I've played. Now, like I said, the combat doesn't have quite as much depth, and it can be very janky, especially when fighting multiple enemies. However, I love the brutal animations. They look so good and so stylish. It makes you feel like a total badass. There's not really a ton of progression and potential with the combat, but it still looks good, and I'm sure some people are able to create some strong builds around it. I really want to try like a gunslinger playthrough where I just run in and take everyone out effectively in combat. I think it looks awesome when done right. One thing I really loved about the first Dishonored was how gritty, dark, and brutal its world was, and Dishonored 2 is no different. However, the environments have some more variety, and there's some beautiful areas, including the vibrant city of Serkonos. Yet you still see blood on the streets, rats, guards terrorizing and executing people at will, tons of checkpoints and walls of light, blood fly infestations where you have to destroy the nests or carefully avoid them, otherwise they'll attack you. The world of Dishonored is very violent and grim. It makes it so dangerous and gripping that makes you want to learn and explore more about it. It also serves well for the story, as Corvo or Emily, depending on whom you choose to play as, haven't really seen this side of the continent in a long time since they've been living in luxury in Dunwall. Perhaps the best part about these sandbox-style missions and locations is the sheer amount of exploration it allows for. There's actually just so much to explore and discover. Even after 3 playthroughs, I've come nowhere near to seeing all of it. You can find hidden areas, special opportunities that bring you closer to your objective, or little mini quests to give you an advantage in infiltrating an area or assassinating your target. There's all sorts of different newspapers, notes, and letters to read that provide more lore and backstory for the world, provide you with mission clues or little mini stories that expand upon different characters. I don't usually read all the text in these kinds of games, but I did for this game, and I feel it really helped with my understanding of the setting and lore this game is set in. It also just helps with general immersion. Everything feels so thought and fleshed out. The writers killed it with this series in general, making the world feel so big and expansive, like it exists outside of the main characters and their storylines. This game is 1,000 times better if you take it slow and take your time to go through the mission and explore and collect as much as you can. And then there's the phenomenal level design on top of it. This game has so many standout missions and such creative and unique ideas. I already touched on the timepiece section at the mansion, but another one that really stands out to me is the Jindosh estate that's patrolled by guards, clockwork soldiers, and a mansion that can be shifted around and changed by pulling levers. Ironically enough, this was probably the most challenging one because of those clockworks. Each level provides you with a fairly simple objective and dozens of ways to accomplish that objective, allowing you to be creative and strategic. Like I said, exploration is incentivized and rewarded, where you can learn important clues or find special opportunities, sort of similar to what you may experience in the Hitman games. You can find notes or overhear conversations to find more clues and evidence to help you plan your assassination in the most effective way possible. Now, the story of Dishonored 2 is very interesting. This game takes place a whole 15 years after the original. So Emily Kaldwin is now an adult, as she's Empress of Dunwall like her mother Jessamine was, and our main guy Corvo Otano from the first game and Emily's father is now the aged royal protector and spy master for Dunwall. Oh, and he's fully voiced now, which is cool since he's mute during the entire first game. Who knows, maybe he swore a vow of silence at a young age and it finally wore off sometime during those 15 years. And might I say, I want to get into the voice acting performances later, but god, they got the perfect voice for Corvo. Stephen Russell voiced him, who's known for voicing the protagonist of the Thief games, and wow, he did an excellent job voicing Corvo. Not to mention, he has one of the most badass voices ever.
You looked up and there are wolves at the gate. Wolves with red muzzles. hungry for your insides.
But anyways, like I said, this picks up 15 years after the first game, and one day, out of the blue, the long-lost sister of the former Empress and Emily's aunt, Delilah, shows up and reveals herself, overthrows Emily, and starts a coup in Dunwall. From there, you choose who you want to play the story as, Corvo or Emily. Whichever one you choose, the opposite will be frozen in stone by Delilah, and you're off on your own to escape Dunwall. I chose Corvo first because he's the first game's protagonist, but regardless of whom you choose, both stories are very good. Corvo is an extremely deadly assassin in his later years who's suddenly thrown back into a dire situation where he has to do whatever it takes to stop Delilah and save his daughter Emily. And of course, the outsider takes advantage of this opportunity to offer Corvo his mark once again. And whether or not he takes it is entirely up to you if you want to play with or without the supernatural powers. But to save Emily, Corvo must go back into the darkness, so to speak. He's going to have to reopen a part of his life that he thought was behind him. He even must return to his home in Karnaca, which he hasn't seen in decades. You can tell throughout the story, Corvo is tired. He's much older now and experienced, but he's still willing to do whatever it takes to save Emily. A lot of the story also changes based on how you play the game. You'll get different dialogue, sometimes subtle, sometimes not, based on if you play with high or low chaos, and there's a few different choices to make along the way. And then obviously the endings are different based on high or low chaos as well. I really enjoyed Corvo's story. I always love when the old assassin is forced to return and slip back into his old life. Kind of reminds me of like a John Wick sort of type character. But Corvo as a character just has so much depth and complexity. He's from the streets, he's not a royal or noble, but he ends up father of the Empress and royal protector while still remembering where he came from. He lives the royal life, but it's clear he doesn't particularly love it. And like I said, Stephen Russell's performance in this game is incredible. You can really hear and feel the fatigue and emotion in Corvo's voice. I got chills a few times just listening to him speak.
I don't know what grand scheme you've got underway, Delilah, but I'm coming to put you in your grave.
Interestingly enough though, Corvo's story isn't canon. The canon story in Dishonored 2 is when you choose to play as Emily, which was confirmed by the developers themselves and is obvious if you play the Death of the Outsider DLC, but again, I think both stories were great. I do have a little bias towards Corvo, again because he's the protagonist of the first game and he has a really cool mask and voice, but Emily's story was very good as well. And that's the thing, both of these stories work and make perfect sense, which does not happen often when you have one story that's canon and another that's not. So of course, if you choose Emily, her story is about trying to take back her throne in Dunwall and save Corvo. Basically flipping the concept of the first game where you were Corvo trying to avenge Jessamine and save little Emily. And unlike Corvo, Emily was born into a royal family where she never really had to struggle on the streets. So Emily gets to experience what Karnaca is like and just how bad it is in some parts of her kingdom that she was unaware of. She was trained by Corvo himself, so she's more than capable, and you also get the choice with her to accept the Outsider's mark, although she has some different powers that I touched on earlier. Then there's a few interesting supporting characters as well, like Megan Foster, who's very mysterious and is also the protagonist for the Death of the Outsider DLC, who might I add is voiced by Rosario Dawson. This game's voice cast is actually insanely good. Along with Rosario Dawson, we got Vincent D'Onofrio as Duke Luca Abel. I recognize that voice immediately, and hey, how about that? Two actors from Daredevil. We also have Pedro Pascal as Paolo, another crossover with Rosario Dawson there in Star Wars, who's had so many big roles I'm sure you know him from, and the Outsider is voiced by Robin Lord Taylor, who I know as Penguin from Gotham. The cast is amazing, which I was not expecting from an Arcane game, but it really elevates the story. And I think the story as a whole for both Corvo and Emily was very good. It's quite a simple plot, which is not a bad thing at all. You have a very clear goal throughout the story from beginning to end, and it sets up all these different locations and missions very well. And again, there's so much replay value with the story and with all the different choices and endings you can get. Now, if you do decide to play Dishonored 2 and you enjoy it, I highly recommend the Death of the Outsider DLC. This is a great DLC following the story of Megan Foster after the events of the main game story, with a familiar face as well. The story is really intriguing, especially for a DLC. Megan gets new unique powers that are very fun to use. She gets Displace, which is the alternative to Corvo's Blink and Emily's Far Reach. That allows Megan to place markers in the world and then swap positions with it. She also gets Foresight, which allows her to leave her body, pause time, and scout out and mark enemies or objects ahead. And she gets Semblance, which allows her to steal the face and identity of any living person, including guards and all that. I loved the new powers. They were a lot of fun and a really refreshing change of pace from Corvo and Emily's. She also has new tools. The Voltaic gun replaces the crossbow with a few different ammunition types, and she gets the hook mines, which were so fun to use. You just throw them onto a surface and they magnetize people to them. You can even set it to lethal or non-lethal. They were just so much fun. On top of that, you get a handful of large explorable missions, new animations, and contracts, which is unique to the DLC and allows you to complete quick side hustles for coins. And of course, just like the main game, you can upgrade all your weapons and tools at the black market shops. It's a wonderful DLC with lots of new content and an intriguing story. I highly recommend it if you want more Dishonored. As for the game's general presentation, it's a very good looking game. I really like the art style, and really my only annoyance is on PC it's maxed at 120 FPS, which is fine of course, but it would have been nice to have uncapped frame rates for those whose PCs can achieve more than that. So, should you buy Dishonored 2 in 2022? Yes, you absolutely should, especially for you stealth game enthusiasts. This game is one of the best options you can get. At the time of recording, Arcane just had a huge publisher sale. The game is like $6 on consoles right now. That is an absolute steal. In full price, it's only $30, but it seems to go on sale quite often, so I recommend picking it up on one of those. For that cheap of a price, the value and replayability you're getting is insane. And if you find you really enjoy Dishonored 2, then I definitely recommend picking up the DLC as well. But if you've played Dishonored 2, let me know what you think about it down in the comments, or if this video was helpful in your decision to give it a try. If you enjoyed the video and you're new, I'd appreciate it if you considered subscribing. And if you wish to support the channel, I now have channel memberships. You can click the join button next to my channel or click the link in the description. But other than that, thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day, everyone.